Good afternoon. Welcome back to another afternoon edition of the B&H Virtual Event Space here with Brett Wells from Sigma. We're talking macro photography today. So this is part two. So we have invited you all to send in your macro photos. In the the first part, I was going to say rendition there. I get stuck on these words, Brett, and I can't get them out of my head. But Brett went over some common macro things, terms and equipment and all stuff that is out of my reach because I'm not a macro photographer, but I'm here with Brett and he's the expert. And that's why we have him here. So I want to thank Brett for joining us again. I want to thank Sigma for sponsoring today's event. And Brett, I'm going to stick along. I might learn a thing or three.
Yeah, absolutely. Be nice to have your input on this. Thank you very much. Thanks to B&H. Thank you to Derek for and the rest of those who are here today. Thank you all for attending, for joining back up. I'd like to throw or to say one thing to one of your comments though. I think everybody wants to be a macro photographer, right? Like everybody always thinks about, well, maybe I should get a macro lens. That looks fun, and that was kind of the whole idea of this class was let's look at some of those concepts. Let's take it to another level beyond what a lot of people do with a normal lens or the kit lens or the basic macro lens or something like that. So I hope the first part of it was very informative. And I've got some images today, a handful. I know this was a little bit more difficult subject matter, and that might have had something to do with the ability of some of you all, or I know time gets in the way and whatever. But let's look at what we've got today, and we will talk about the good and the bad. If any of these are your images and you'd like to share something about them, tell us what you had in mind or what you used to do them, anything like that, please feel free to throw that in. Derek's going to keep up with the comments and chats and stuff like that. So, and well, no further ado, let's just go into these. So this is the first one. I don't have a lot of information tagged along with any of these files, but obviously we see water drops on some type of metal background. What I love about this is the symmetry of it. That the top and the bottom is very reflective of each other, but you've definitely got a hard or a bright light source coming from the bottom left of this image and dark on the right. You can look at each of those little water droplets and see where the reflection is. That's always an easy way to tell anything that reflects, even the human eye. If you're looking at a portrait, you can look in somebody's eye and you can tell exactly what kind of lights the photographer used. That's probably a super secret portrait tip, but I'll give it to you for free today anyway. But learn to notice those things, learn to look at light, learn to see how people lit a shot. So this is a little bit broader. I don't know if it's just a larger light panel, light source, or you are lighting through something broader, but it's not like a little pinpoint light. There's definitely something a little bit bigger lighting up each of those droplets, but that part's really cool. One of the things that I love about macro 2, and this image really exhibits it, is it's a lot easier, I think, when you're close up to things, to create images that become very graphic, that become less about subject matter and more about design, shape, patterns, the image itself, that kind of thing. So I think the image stands on its own, even if we don't quite understand exactly what it is. I don't think we need to understand, what it is that we're looking at, the actual subject. So, any thoughts on that?
I agree with everything you said. I think certain images like this, I almost look at this as like one of those macro images that can be used for like stock or texture, like a backdrop, and have some kind of commercial use to it because it's aesthetically pleasing.
Mm-hmm.
I the same way I like how there's a combination of both gradient and in focus and out of focus that takes your eye through the image.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Yeah.
think that adds a level of interest to it because your eye is always drawn to the lightest part of the frame, right? So your eye is drawn there, it kind of brings you up to that dark part that's in focus and then back out of focus with like that gradation to the gray there. So I think it's an aesthetically pleasing image.
That's
I Yeah, go ahead, Brett.
that's a, that light draws your eye, and so because there's a little bit of light on all of the water droplets, it becomes busy, but not in a bad way. There's some images that get busy and get distracting. But this, there's just so many things to look at. But you're absolutely right, because that just the middle band is the part that's in focus. I guess it's a little lower on the right, a little higher on the left, but there's just a band of focus across the image. Your eye is going to keep coming back to that. Focus draws your attention as well, just like light. Lines can help lead around an image, and all the lines of the light, even the background, are leading us over to the left side, and then your eye kind of goes back through the image from there.
Even
Yeah,
like
go ahead.
the little details, like on the left side, it's like that texture in
Mhm.
whatever the surface is. It gives me like vibes of like a record, like an old
Yeah,
record, like it's just like that, whatever that the linear
yeah,
nature, the
okay.
linear texture of it is. So just little things
Like
like that, you know. And then
some of that
there's the ones.
in the water
Yeah,
droplets
go
as
ahead.
well. Get some of those
Yeah,
lines.
exactly. It just
Huh.
gives it like a little bit more interest to me. I like when there's layers to images. I think, you know, even there's the one water droplet there has it look, I can't even make out what it is seeing it, you know. I would want to see really, really, really zoomed in, but I don't know if you see, it's like kind of in the middle to the left. Yep, right there.
And I don't know how to zoom in on to try to make it.
It'll be left up to the imagination, but I mean, it's enough to draw your eye. And I think when you can take an image that more or less is a pretty simple image, right? It's not, there's not too much to it contextually,
Yeah,
but you can talk about it because it's just a pleasing, common image. And I think that's what
yeah,
a lot of macro photography ends up being. It should be, like you said, busy, but not, it's busy in a good way. I like to say good busy.
exactly. It's interesting. Lots of little details to look at. Technically, it's really nice. Focus is solid,
Mhm,
tight where it needs to be. And again, if the whole thing was in focus, probably be hard to do that anyway. But if it was, that
mhm.
might be a little more distracting. Exposure looks good. I like this image a lot. It's really really nice.
Yeah, definitely. Beautiful.
Hmm. This one, the first thing that I notice about it, or the first thing that really really jumps at me, that just nails this, is the color palette. Those cool tones
Mhm.
of the flower, but they're so soft. The transition of colors just beautiful, and against the greens and the stems in the background, that I just absolutely love. I think the color combination, even though it's probably not something you created, you might have made the background, but it works really really well for this. The light is really nice and soft. You don't have any hard shadows anywhere, which that's really pleasing. Um, Again, those leading lines, they're coming in from the right and keep bringing our eye back to the left, which is kind of nice. Keeps our eye in the image that way. I like that there's a couple flowers out of focus on the left. It gives an anchor to the image. It would be just kind of dead space if nothing was there, but if they were sharp, it would be more distracting. Um, it's This is a really nice, pleasing image as well. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously not as graphic. This is more about subject matter and color than it is about design and pattern. But
Yeah, I mean, look how many descriptors we're giving on these images for how they make us feel. How, you know, this is like a soothing, calm, smooth, soft image, and
yeah,
everything in it. I mean, even just the bend of the stems on the flower lead to
yeah,
that. The contrast, as you mentioned, it's sometimes I think people can take in when you don't have such a stark contrast between light and dark and shadow and highlight. Sometimes it can get very monotonous and you don't have enough depth to it. But this, I think, accomplishes it well, where you don't have your shadows aren't crushed, your highlights aren't crushed. It's just a nice balance, and it lends into the entire frame.
it complements the subject matter, right?
Yeah,
It does. You're
definitely.
right.
It's
If
it's
this
the light is as soft
were,
as the image.
yeah, yeah, there's a good way to look at it. If the contrast was greater than this, if you had really really bright highlights and dark shadows, it would be more distracting. You wouldn't notice the color as much. You wouldn't notice the shapes and the subject matter and all those things. You would be looking more at the light. And this, you're right. The light complements, or the contrast range complements the subject matter.
Yeah,
I'm kind of curious. There's one little bit of highlight here, and here and here, but I'm wondering if there was some sort of diffusion to soften the light hitting the flowers, or if it was just an overcast day, something like that. Whatever it is, it worked very well. Keep it in mind. I think there's a lot of little things too that I'm hoping were in. Well, it's nice to think that they were intentional. Sometimes they're just happy accidents, but be careful when you crop things. You don't want to crop something right at the edge of a point, a line, something like that. And it's the same for a person. You don't usually crop people right through joints. It just kind of looks unnatural. But you also don't want a line. For instance, down here at the bottom, if the crop was right there at the edge of that petal, it would be distracting. Your eye would kind of look at it and think, well, where's that going? It just causes tension. And this image doesn't need tension. It's all about the soft, pleasant subject and tone and light and all those things. So the balance of this petal to the top of the frame and this petal to the bottom of the frame is very, very effective. The way you've cropped it. I don't know if that was in camera or after, but
Yeah,
that
it
works for
looks
me.
like the cropping was pretty intentional. Just I look at the stems in the top right corner, and how if they would have, if all of the stems left the frame either a little bit to the left or a little bit lower, I think bringing them to the corner, it adds a level of, like you said, balance. It just compositionally, all
Mhm.
those things you touched on, not losing the edges. Everywhere where there's something going off the frame is
Mhm.
something either out of focus, or the one thing that's in focus going off the frame is the stems. But the stems, the photo's not about the stems, but to include the stems, kind of like you had said previously, I like that term, anchor the image. So those stems kind of anchor the image, or else it's just flowers floating in space.
Mhm.
So whether it was done intentionally or not, I think they clearly, this person has an eye for the content that they're shooting. I think I wouldn't be surprised if this is somebody who takes macro images like this regularly, and this is their thing, this is their passion, because it's just composed beautifully. Even the palette, like you said earlier, so many people lend towards warmer palettes because warmer, highly vibrant images attract your eye more. So I feel that when people use a cooler palette, it shows more of a restraint, and really a sense of getting what they want out of the image, and not just bowing to, hey, I'm just going to crank up the vibrancy to 50 and go with really warm tones.
Yeah. No, you're right. I think this image feels very deliberate all the way around. Like this seems like something that somebody was controlling, capturing, composing, all that kind of stuff, and I think it's very effective. Uh, I don't honestly, I wouldn't change a thing. I think it's a
Yeah,
great image.
definitely.
All right. I
I
love
saw the
this.
preview of this on the left, and I'm like, I was waiting to see it full size.
Oh, there we go. I'll hide those. Um, I love that somebody really tried to push the envelope here, get into something really really close, capture some detail, um, and the detail in it. Like I said, we don't know. I don't know exactly what you see on your screen, but all the little tiny, I don't even know what to call them, hairs on the face of this bug are great. The color in the eyes versus the legs and the body, um, all that stuff is really really nice. You can see how shallow the depth of field is. That just that's a part of extreme macro when you get in that close to something. Um, so I really like that this person tried to capture or to push themselves and try something new. Um, the one thing I would say about this image is the design of the image, the layout of the image, the composition isn't as strong, isn't as deliberate. The symmetry is interesting, but there's a lot of more empty space on the left and the right. And with composed images, with single subjects, with macro, sometimes it's really, really tough to make an interesting image or more interesting image to elevate your image a little bit. Not to say that this isn't interesting. I don't mean it that way. I just think that if the composition was a little bit stronger, then the image becomes stronger as well.
Yeah,
But it can be a really difficult thing to do.
yeah, definitely. I mean, this image is one where you see a lot of insect macro. And
Mm-hmm.
for me, it's always like there's different types specifically of insect macro that you see focus stacked images where everything, we get that really highly detailed front to back image, and then you get something like this where it brings the emphasis to one.
Yeah.
And I don't know what your thoughts are on it. It goes back and forth with me. I think you see some that are focus stacked and it adds a layer of interest. I would want to see something like this focus stacked because it looks like such an interesting shape.
Yeah.
And go like what you were saying with the composition. I would actually want to see it cropped down
Yeah.
to bring more of that emphasis right to what's in focus and really have the out of focus area as just an outlier, something that frames the image rather than dominates the image. And I feel the out of focus areas dominate the image, and it's such a strong, interesting looking creature that I'd want to see more focus. I would love to see this cropped down to about half the size.
I can see that. Yeah. Even maybe square, because I like the legs at the bottom. But I think you're right. If
Hmm.
you cut a little bit off the top and a little off each side, um, maybe a little off the bottom. Um, I'm torn on trying to get everything in focus versus shallow depth of field. There are images I think that are effective both ways. I don't think that there's a wrong or a right to any of that kind of thing. I think, and that's, to me, that's one of the great things about photography is I can do things my way, and especially this type of thing. If I like it, I'm going to do it, and I don't really care if somebody else does. Nobody's paying me to take a picture of a flower, so I'm going to do it the way I want to do it. And sometimes it's great to get everything in focus. Sometimes it's nice to have just, focus can control the way a viewer sees the image, right? I can cause them, or I can force them to see what I want them to see by keeping part of the image in focus. Where if everything's in focus, it becomes more like that first image where your eye's going to move around the frame a lot. And that's not, again, not good or bad. It's just different. It's a different way of displaying your image or your style, your photographs to a viewer. For this, to focus stack something like this, in my experience, it really takes um, a higher end device like the Cognisys Stack Shot, I think is what it's called,
Hmm.
that electronically moves the camera and controls the focus. Um, to get this, I mean, you can see how little depth of field you have, but if you move the focus ring on a lens, you're going to be focused on his tail instead of the head. It's one tiny little adjustment by hand is generally going to move the lens, the focus in the lens way too much. So you need some sort of device. Some of the in-camera focus stacking or focus, uh, whatever, refocusing and for focus stacking
Hmm.
might work. I don't really know. I've never tried this level of extreme with the stuff that's built into the cameras that I have. So, I think you're right. I think this could be really interesting, focus stacked, but it may require a lot more equipment to do that too. That may be beyond the reach of most people.
See, ladies and gentlemen, that's why we have Brett here to give me a reality check on what is possible, what's not. Now, Brett, what kind of lens for shooting images like this for people who look at these insect images in particular and
Yeah.
they're like, wow, that's such a cool shot. What do people normally shoot this at? What focal length?
I'm going to go back to what I said in the class last week. My absolute favorite macro lens is the 105D GDN. Our newer macro lens came out at maybe 6 months ago, something like that. It's available for Sony E mount and for L mount. I always forget this. Leica, Panasonic, and Sigma's our partnership. So on our little camera, this new FPL 61 megapixels with 105 millimeter macro lens is just gorgeous. On any of the Sonys, it's going to be an absolutely beautiful lens. And it's focused by wire, and it's sensitive to distance. So when you're focused at infinity or portrait length, you move the lens, the focus ring a little bit, and it adjusts the focus a lot. When you're at a macro level and you move the focus ring, it does, and especially if you move it slowly, it adjusts focus very, very, very in very small amounts, very small increments. So it's possible you might be able to do some focus stacking with that lens for something like this. Definitely something longer though. With this level of magnification, the shorter the focal length, the closer you get to the subject to get the same magnification out of it. So you really don't want to try this with the 40, 50, 60, 70 millimeter macros. I think you'd just be right up on top of something. So you might even look at longer, our older lenses like the 150 and the 180 EX macros. I know a couple companies make 200 macros. So things like that can be nice just because you can be more like a foot or a foot and a half away, but um, probably in that 100 to 150 millimeter range. Obviously, you want a really sharp lens because you want to catch all those little details.
Definitely. And before
Yeah,
we move on to the next image, Buddy has chimed in on the flower image. Buddy says it was a natural background and he
very
just
nice.
had really outstanding light. 25 images stacked in Helicon.
Oh wow!
So,
I wondered because there is so much depth of field, but then the background falls off a lot.
yeah,
Um, and I wondered if that was just a background that was 10 feet away or more, or if this could have been focus stacked. So kudos to you. That's really well done. And if that's natural and you were outside and could capture 25 images without any movement in the flowers, you had a great opportunity and you took advantage of it.
yeah.
Really great.
Buddy, we'll get you in the chair next time instead of me. I'll take a back seat.
Heck, you can just teach the class next time.
Oh
All
no,
right.
you're still coming, Brett.
Oh, all right. We can have a panel discussion. That'll be fun.
There we go.
Um, I think if I remember from the caption of this or the title of the image, this is paper on a light box. Um,
Oh wow. Now, okay.
yeah, it's kind of hard to tell what you're looking at. You do see a little bit of
Yeah.
fibers in the lines, but going back to my comment about that first image, again, this is just, it's almost entirely graphic. Like there's so little in the image that anchors it to a true subject matter. And again, that nothing wrong with that at all. It's very effective. It just becomes about lines and color, the gradation of the light in the background. Um, those kinds of things. And then, that's what I noticed first is obviously the two lines and then the gradations in the background. And then my eye starts to pick up on, oh wait, those lines are a little bit fuzzy, like they've actually got some, fibers sticking out from them. And then I realized that the lines aren't exactly the same color. And I pick up on those details, more of the anchoring details of reality or of the subject rather than just the composition. Nicely done. If this was centered in the frame, those two lines, this wouldn't be nearly as interesting. But the off center, the curves that are slightly different, all those little things I like a lot about it. Normally, I would tell you that this, I don't have a cursor on my screen, but the little tiny triangle in the bottom, we call a trap triangle. Like there's two lines of the subject in the edge of the frame that kind of trap that triangle in at the edge. And normally I would tell you that that's something you're not supposed to do. But I think if you didn't have that down there, the two lines don't separate and then it doesn't have as much impact. I don't know. It resolution, I guess. So I think this is one of those cases where the exception to the rule is very effective.
Definitely. I think this is not normally what you think of when you think macro, and I love it. I love the minimalist nature of it. I absolutely love the fibers. I love little imperfections, and I think they lend to. I think if it was just straight, if this was a paper that had a different texture to it or no texture really to it, it wouldn't be as interesting. It literally would just be like, okay, did you take did you draw something up in Illustrator? Kat says it is curled construction paper. So like you had said, Brett, sitting on top of a light box. I was very curious to know what type of paper it was or is, and now I know. So it's beautiful. I love minimalist when it's done right. I agree what you said about the trapped triangle. If that
Yeah.
line doesn't, if they don't separate there, it's not as interesting to me for some reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so wonderfully abstract. But again, then there's those little details that tell you this isn't a painting, that tells you this really is a photograph, and that part I absolutely love. I think this is a really strong image. I could see a series of this, like with different color backgrounds and different patterns to the paper. I could almost see like a triptych on a wall of just different primary colors or different pastel colors, different things like that.
Definitely.
It would be real easy to continue uh, to
This
just yourself and try different compositions with the same technique.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is perfect proof that sometimes we as photographers overthink and overcomplicate things. We
Yeah,
try to go, when I think macro, I'm instantly thinking what has a ton of texture, what has layers, what is super complicated and would be really cool to get a very detailed shot of. And here you have somebody who took literally two pieces of paper on a light box. And like you were saying, this is something I could see in like a 4 foot by 5 foot canvas on a wall in an Upper East Side mansion. And you'd be like, wow, that's art.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is very much that type of commercial art that you know residences or businesses, hotels, that kind of thing would put on a wall. Um, so it's hard to get into that, but you might be able to make some money with this. Um, to your point, I find myself, for whatever reason, especially with landscapes and waterfalls and that kind of thing, I look at a scene and think, wow, this is great. And, I try to be very, very slow and deliberate, look at it, see what I want to capture. But then I find myself like, well, that limb is really cool. Maybe I should just back up a little bit and I could use that. And I find sometimes when I go back and look at my images, is like there's no real point of interest in this. It's just a great scene, but there's no subject. There's no, like I was trying to capture too much, and I miss the days of. It's hard to say this working for Sigma, but I miss the days of 4x5 cameras. That was one of my earliest experiences as a photographer, was using view cameras. And when you went out, you only had a couple pieces of film. Like you had to load it in the darkroom, so you only had 6 or 8 pieces of film with you, and that's all the pictures you could capture. So you didn't just start, popping off frames. You had to be very careful, very slow, very deliberate in everything, the choice of subject matter and the composition and the exposure and all of those things. And sometimes I think we have uh, regressed. I think we've gone backward from the
We've
days of
taken too much
technical.
advantage of digital.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I've got whatever 128 gigabyte card. I can shoot 2,000 frames of this waterfall. And
Yeah,
there's a place for firing off frames like that. But no, I think this is a great example of just being deliberate. Being simple and basic and clean and effective.
definitely.
Cool.
They came firing today. We got some macro heads out there who are
Yeah,
doing their thing.
yeah.
I
Uh,
The one thing that jumps out to me, and I'll let you jump in on this, Brett, is just I want to see that raindrop get clearance on the right edge,
mm.
especially with so much clearance on the left. Even if the raindrop weren't right on the edge of the leaf, I would still want that even balance there.
Yeah, I think
Um,
this is one where symmetry of the subject would be most effective because the background's not symmetrical. So I think the symmetry, more symmetry in the subjects, having the main flower centered, like you said, and you don't want to crop off uh, just into that water droplet. I can't actually see that because I don't have a cursor and I can't move the whatever the chat window from Zoom out of the way. So I can't see like that right side of the frame. That's really funny. Ain't technology great? Um, the focus I think is really nice. You've got beautiful, beautiful texture in the front petals, the water droplets, and then even the purples inside the flower. You've got texture or nice detail going into that, and then it falls off really nicely. This is another. I'm curious if this is focus stacked
it,
because subject has more depth of field and the background falls off quickly. That's generally a cue that it's stacked together. And again, if you did, that's fantastic.
I'm gonna give you
Uh,
a guess, Brett. How many? It is focus stacked, and I have the number of images in front of me. How many images do you think?
as far back as that goes, I might say 10 or 12.
100.
Really? Wow.
100
Okay.
images. That's
Um,
dedication.
it is dedication. And my curiosity is if it was necessary. Like, were you shooting it with a wide open aperture? And you might have been able to stop down to 5, 6, or 8 and you get fewer images. I don't know. Maybe that's what it took, this close up. I mean, this is fuchsia, I think, and that's not a big flower. So it really might have taken that many images.
J- J-
It's
Jerry says he
great.
was shooting at 5.6.
Okay. Then that's what it took. It's great. You don't have any bands that I can see in focus. Sometimes we talked about this last week. When you try focus stacking, if you don't overlap the focus in each image, you get these kind of bands of in focus and out of focus, and it's kind of funny
Mm,
to see it. I don't see any of that. Looks tack sharp to me. Um, and it's gone back together really nicely. Whatever you use to integrate the images to put them back together. I don't see any ghosting around the petals, anything like that.
yeah, it looks nice. I mean, one thing with all the images we've seen so far is the processing's been on point. And I'm a big person that believes get it right in camera and do not murder it in processing. Um, and I think everybody's polished the images very well. I mean,
Yeah,
they're
I agree with
beautifully
you.
soft.
Somebody asked me once at a workshop I was doing, what do you do when you get an image wrong? How do you fix it? And I just kind of laughed and I said, I don't mean to make fun of the question, but I don't fix images in post for one simple reason. Nobody pays me to take a picture of a flower. They pay me to help them take pictures of flowers. So if I didn't get it wrong, if I didn't get it right in camera, that's just an excuse to go back out to a park or whatever and shoot it again. And I would
Yeah.
much rather be in a national park, state park, my backyard, whatever, taking a picture of a flower than sitting behind my computer trying to clean up an image and make something out of something that wasn't quite there. You know, I'd much rather be shooting and be outside. So
Definitely.
to me, now keep in mind, I am looking at this computer screen with a big LED light in my field of view above it. And this is not the best lighting conditions, viewing conditions. To me, well, that way there's actually, it's better. I might bring up the shadow detail just in the purples. Like I don't think I would change the composite or the contrast in the reds and the greens, the background, the light on the water droplets, all of that is just perfect. I think I might just pull up the slider, the lightness of just that purple value
Mhm.
in Lightroom, just a hair. There's detail there, and again, on a better screen, it may look perfect. It just on my laptop, it's not looking like I would just like to see a little more detail, but that's me.
Yeah.
And
I
that's a
agree.
yeah, that's a nitpicky thing though.
Yeah.
And that's one where that's not something you could have done out in the field. Really, you can't light up underneath the flower and control that. So you definitely want to. That's something you would have to do in post. But fantastic image, really well done on the technique. I'm impressed. I think. Nope, you got one more, and then I think you have to look at mine. A couple of more of mine.
I'll save all my rough critiques for those.
Okay, that's fine. I can wait.
They're way better than anything I would do. So we have a
Um,
B here.
yeah, yeah. And this, I think the first time I ever photographed a bee around a flower, like gathering pollen, and you start to see those little bits of pollen on the bee, you realize how many hairs there are on a bee. I mean, when these things are flying around, one, they're moving quick and they're, ½ inch long at best, a little honeybee or whatever like this. Um, you don't notice those things. You would never see all the detail in the flower. Again, all those little filaments and the texture inside the flower. I really like the angle of view of this. Almost positive this is a passion flower, and they're from the front. I mean, most of the time they're shot from the front, looking dead on, because people like the sort of symmetry of them, but then the irregularities of the petals as they go out and everything else. So that's a very typical view. Looking at this from the side shows us parts of the flower that you wouldn't normally see in a picture of a flower like that. But then also you get to see exactly what that bee is doing. Nice detail. I can see all the stuff in the flower. There's nothing blown out, so the exposure looks good. Color's nice. It's nice that, again, the composition, we're not cropping into the edges of the little petals sticking out from the flower, whatever we call that part of the flower. It's not, on my screen, it's not like crisp, sharp. It's good, it's focused, but I'm wondering if it's just a lower resolution image, or maybe there was just the shutter speed needed to be slightly higher if you were trying to handhold this or something like that. But otherwise, it's a really nice image, and those things are hard. I chase bees around a lot if I go out to botanical gardens or places like that, and I see them flying around. I try to chase them and get shots like this, and it's not hard, not easy. Anything that moves, birds, kids, whatever they
Yeah,
can
definitely.
photograph.
The one thing that draws my eye that I don't want my eye drawn to is the bottom left corner.
Mm.
The detail there's too much detail in that bottom left corner, and it kind of pulls my eye there when I don't want to go there. I do agree with liking, it's one of those things where it's, if you crop it out, then you lose so much, and you lose the edges of those like those tentacles, like they add interest, and they kind of draw you back into the meat of the image.
Yeah.
And maybe there's that one out of focus part right there, and then which I'm guessing is the petal bent back up in the foreground.
Yeah, toward the bottom there. Yeah, it's got to
Yeah.
be. And I'm okay with that part. I'm with you there. I like the bottom left corner compositionally because it balances the top right corner. And most of this image is about diagonals that go from the top left to the bottom right, at least the composition of the image. So I like that balance there, but you're right. If it was a little bit less in focus or maybe a little bit darker, and those again are things that you really can't control when you're out shooting, but something that you could do in post. You can just go into the correction tools in Lightroom or Photoshop and blur that area, make it look like it was shot more out of focus. Or you can take the exposure down in that area, just darken it a little bit, and that would make it just won't jump out quite as much. But I think you're right, because it's the same values, color and brightness as the top right corner, then your eye notices that it's in focus and the rest of the background's not. So
That's a
I can
great
see
point. That's a great point about the balance. I didn't think about it that way, but when you say that, it does give it a lot more credence, that the fact that that green does balance, and now you start to look at it on that diagonal plane. And so yeah, I do agree, a little softening, maybe nothing crazy, but I do like,
it doesn't be as soft as the background as the top corners, but just softer than it is, and it wouldn't grab your eye like it does now. But I'm with you, like I wouldn't cut it out, just because the composition is clean. It's very effective the way it is. And I think if you crop that out, you lose too much of the interest of the flower. And I'll go back to that second image as well, the focus stacked flowers, that the color palette of this is very effective as well. Again, it's not like intense, you have a lot more cool tones, but it's a really pleasant balance of the pinks and purples and all those colors versus the greens and warmer tones.
yeah. And again, like the other images, it's not overly saturated. And
Yeah.
I love that a lot of times you see macro images anytime there's a bee in it, and it's like we have this like Disney characterized version of what a bee looks like, and in real life, I mean, that's what a bee looks like. And I think some people would take a saturation brush to the bee and try to really make that color pop. And I love the color scale on this. It almost has like a greenish kind of hue to it, like an underlying, not just the green tones in here, but even like the whites in here. It looks like it's on the more green side of the scale, and it's just a very natural image.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes that can be like if you're in a canopy with green leaves above you and the sun's bouncing around or light's bouncing around and bouncing off of that, it can cause a greener cast
Yeah.
to the light, even if the color temperature goes from warm to cool, but then you have balance that goes from magenta to green, the other whatever axis of the color chart.
Mhm.
So yeah, no, I think you're right. It's an interesting point you talk about perception, the way we perceive things. When I taught photography at the Art Institute here in Atlanta, I used to ask my students like, "What color is pavement?" Every year somebody was black. It's not really. I mean, go look at it. Asphalt, when they lay it down, is almost that, but after it's been down for 6 months or a year, it gets really light. And after it's been down, you look at the roads that have been paved 10 years ago, and they're a really light gray. They're not dark anymore. But it's that perception. Like, we have these ideas of how things are supposed to look, and so sometimes when you look at a real bee, like you said, it just, well, wait a minute, aren't they supposed to be
it's,
yellow
it's
and black,
bright
like from
yellow and black.
something? Yeah. Um, and so that can be a natural tendency to try to edit an image in post to the point, to a ridiculous level, that it just doesn't at all look natural anymore. Nothing wrong with a little bit of vibrance or saturation in an image, but
Yeah,
all right.
definitely.
So I just
Actually,
pulled a couple more images off of my computer real quick that I've shot more recently that haven't made it into presentations, um, just to have a few more things to show you today. If there's any comments or questions, and like you said, Derek, go ahead and tear it apart.
no, the first thing that jumps out, other than I'm big on shapes and geometry, and I love it. Just has like this like first thing that jumps out to me is like a squid. It has a shape, and it's not like a normal like flower shape, right?
Yeah,
But it also lines up with the out of focus areas. And I always, when I teach, I preach on paying attention to what's out of focus as much as you pay attention to what's in focus, because the out of focus areas can ruin something that is great in focus. And I'm going to say, because you know your stuff, this is completely intentional. It's the out of focus area frames what's in focus, as much as what's in focus frames the entire shape of the image. So
you're
that's
absolutely,
was
no,
that
I mean,
correct?
you're right. Background, it is correct. I mean, I did move around until I got the composition that I was looking for, and that the foreground and the subject and the background kind of complement each other or echo each other that way. But no, you're absolutely right about the background. You need to pay attention to an entire frame. It's really, really easy to take a picture of something, but it's much harder to create a good image that has that subject in it. One of my favorite photographers years and years and years ago uh, has said something in a presentation that has stuck with me ever since, and that is, don't take pictures of something, create photographs that are something. And that really kind of, like, I don't know, has sunk in and makes me think about like the backgrounds, because you always see those pictures with like a power line that goes through somebody's head. Like, it was really easy to just move up 6 inches or down 6 inches and you would have cut that out, but you weren't paying attention to the background when you did that. And
Yeah, definitely. And I think another thing that jumps out about this is the color palette.
mm,
It's a beautiful color palette, and it's so funny. I spent the entire first half talking about these cool tones, and I'm like, I love. There's something to it, like the shadows have almost like there's like a warmer shadow, and I don't know if that's something where you color graded it or if that's just how it was, but it's a
happy
pleasing
accident,
palette. What was that?
happy accident on that one. I really
Well,
don't
hey,
do that, so I'm not gonna I'm not gonna change color just on a back. Well, some, but I mean maybe some, but not on this. I think I just took the vibrance up a little bit just to make those colors in the flower themselves pop.
it's
Um,
nice. I think the like that bottom area, so those shadows in the lower half of the frame, the fact that there's any detail in there, and again, a lot of times when we talk about images, we compare them to what we normally see. We
mm,
normally see people who will crush the blacks, or they will pull the blacks so far up that it's like a gray and then everything is just muddy. There's a nice amount of detail in there, just enough detail, not too much. I like the fact that it, by having those shadows not fully crushed, it
Mhm.
adds a little bit of warmth to it, where it's not just stark black and then your whites aren't crushed. So
Yeah.
you look at your, I'm going to use the term bokeh. You look at your bokeh in the background, and it's,
Yeah.
not only is it nicely shaped, because I don't pay attention to the shape, but I know there's someone out there who's like, it's nice and circular, but it's
Yeah,
not,
especially up in the
your
corner,
your your highlights aren't too bright. So it's just beautiful and soft.
thank you. Yeah, I'm always trying to pay attention to the highlight detail and shadow detail. I'm always looking for, especially for this kind of thing, where it's a controlled shot that I have time. I'm looking at the histograms and trying to make sure that I'm capturing everything. And then I might tweak the white or blacks in Lightroom just to make sure that there is some detail, that I don't block up all the shadows or something like that. So I just saw something I need to fix. I'll see if
Uh
you. I mean, really, like, just popped it on the frame, on the screen, and I can see something that I need to fix that I've never noticed before.
I like the framing. This is going to be really funny, and maybe it's because I'm a fatty. I love ice cream, and when I see that leaf at the bottom, it makes me think of Briars. Isn't that,
Okay,
that's like that's the Briars leaf right there?
I'll
Uh,
see that.
I love the balance of the image. Um, One really, really, really minor thing, and again, it's like I feel like when you do critiques, it's
Mm,
like you look at stuff that you don't normally like. If I just looked at the image and I weren't critiquing it,
yeah,
I probably would never see the slightest little edge in the top left corner. That
that's what
little
I'm.
that little
Yep,
bit of light, I would have just cropped
yep,
it in like an eighth of an inch.
yep. Yeah, and I can't believe I never noticed that before. Like I said, I don't know that I've ever shown this image to anybody, so that might be why. And I might have pulled something that wasn't totally edited, but I can't believe I didn't see that before I
You're
saved this out.
fired. You're
Yeah, I
fired.
know. All right, let's get
No.
that off the screen. This, um, again, sharpness in the foreground, softness in the background, but there's still detail in the background, both for focus and for shadow and stuff like that. Um, it's one where flowers to me are kind of like people, like they work in the middle of the frame, because it's to me it's more like a portrait than a landscape or something might be. But still, the leaf in the bottom and the right kind of give me that diagonal, so it breaks up the perfect symmetry.
And I like that framing of it, how it is kind of, it's diagonal right into that corner, but not, it's slight. Now, we did have a comment come in on
Yeah.
the last image. So I'm going to have you jump back to the last image because Melissa, who's joining us, and Melissa, I did see your comment regarding the water droplets on your image. So once we wrap up, before we wrap up, remind me, Brett, and we'll go back to that very, very first image. Um,
Oh, okay.
but Melissa is saying she would suggest darkening the diagonal stem under the flower or clone it out.
Yeah, I can see that.
It's a bit too bright. My eye goes there. The flower is gorgeous and it balances nicely with the green in the background.
I like that because it breaks up the background, so it doesn't become a solid field, that at the bottom down there. But I can see that it could be a little bit light. So if I just darken that stem down, it wouldn't stand out as much. I'll give you that. I'll go with that.
Interesting. Yeah,
Yeah,
I saw it as the same way, where it kind of gives something to that lower frame. Without
yeah.
it, I would think it's a little too much dead space, but I do like that darkening it. I didn't even think about that. Sometimes I don't even think dodge, burn, light, and darken. I think like I just eliminate it or reposition, and I think I need to change that aspect of the way I think.
Well, and to me that goes back to my darkroom days too. Like you'd never be able to get rid of that. You couldn't just paint something out, but you could dodge or burn. So my mind does go that way, maybe more often than just cloning. But this is a great example of show your images to people, get feedback, because you're not going to see everything that somebody else sees. You bring things to viewing images that are different than other people do. So
And Jerry says he likes the flower. He says it's cool. Looks like it's hanging in the air.
yeah, it is actually. I think I think the stem came from the left. That may be the part that's coming up there. But there was like a hanging basket, and the flowers just came off from there. This is at an orchid house in the botanical gardens here in Atlanta.
Oh, nice.
Nice captive audience in controlled environment. You get decent light, and you don't have wind inside orchid houses like that. It's a nice place to shoot.
No better way to do it.
Yeah.
This is beautiful. This this is a wall print. Everything. I mean, I look at this and everything. It's like wrapped up in a bow. The subtle green in the backdrop. It's not too much. It's just enough. The framing is absolutely perfect. The softness on the flowers, even that lighter part of the one petal,
Mm-hmm.
is enough to differentiate it and add. I like when there's little outlying elements that it's not too, sometimes they get too boring. And I
Yeah.
think when, and that's the beauty of shooting flowers, because they're not, going back to this thing we're talking about, our expectation of things. Flowers aren't always symmetrical. They're not always beautiful.
They're not always perfect. They have spots
Yeah,
on the petal. They get eaten by bugs, and yeah, all that stuff. Absolutely.
exactly. Now I'm over here. I'm like, you got me. I wanted to look. I got a bouquet of flowers on my tattoo, and I got to see if they're symmetrical, if there's any imperfections there. We got to see how realistic my tattoo is. But Luke agrees, says, I love this one in the background. I think this is just beautiful in every way. It's super soft. If you have not printed this, then I don't know what you're doing, Brett. This needs to be on a wall.
Thank you. Like I said, I'm not sure I've even shown this image to anybody before. So some of the stuff Sigma gave me an assignment to go shoot with one of the new lenses, and
This is what came of it.
that's what came of it.
Even just the differences in the red tones. It's like you have everything from like a pink to the flowers look like when you go into the color slider, like the color mixer slider in a post-processing software, and you can take your reds and make them more orange or make them more
Right.
pink, and it's like it goes through the range of those reds.
Yeah. And it must just be the direction of the sunlight versus reflecting off of something inside, because you have that on the right side, you have a lot more cooler tones, and the left side you have a lot more warmer tones in that same palette.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
I think that's the last one. I was at a lodge down in Ecuador where we're going to take a group to shoot hummingbirds, and our guide pulled this flower, like, stop the truck. We're going down a road, 30 miles an hour, little gravel road, and the guy, he doesn't speak a lot of English. We don't speak a lot of Spanish. Slams on the brakes, jumps out of the truck, and he's like, just wait. All right. So he runs in the forest and grabs this flower, comes back and hands it to me. Were we allowed to do that? I mean, can you just pick wild? Okay. So brought it to the lodge. This background is artificial. So that's one of the ones we were using for the hummingbird setups. But while we were shooting the hummingbirds, I thought I've got to grab a macro lens and get a shot of this thing. There's just so much detail in this, and it's such an unusual flower. I love the flower itself. I think what you want of the image, but
it is awesome. It doesn't even, when you first look at it, it looks almost like it's like a shell, not even like a flower. I guess it's that waxy. It has like that waxy, harder look to it, but super interesting. Very well composed. I love. It's very hard, and I think it has to be done with the right subject matter when you have a background that is so creamy and so blown out. And again, I use the term creamy. I know some people that's like a trigger word. They hate to hear it, but it is. There's no other way to describe that backdrop. And I think to really, especially with the shape of the flower and the shape of I guess, are they veins in the flower? I don't know if they're called veins or vesicles or what they are, but anything in the background, it would be very difficult and very distracting, I feel like. So I think that because it's so plain, it really helps the flower stand out.
That's what I was thinking, is the flower itself has so much texture, so much detail. The bottom part of the flower, the stamen sticking out, the veins and the petals themselves, even that little cap up above. There's so much texture in all of that. I don't want a busy background. I don't want anything, but I also don't want it just to be a solid color. So that background that we already had there worked, just kind of moved it forward or backward to keep it nice and out of focus.
Mhm.
But it still has some sort of gradation to it. So,
Now, Elizabeth asked, and Elizabeth, I don't know if you were referring, because I know Elizabeth said she liked the last image as well. She said she would put it on her wall. And she asked, do you know the name of it? So I don't know. Elizabeth, are you referring to this one or the
if
last one?
you're
Do you know the name
talking
of
about
either of them?
this, I do not know what it's called. It is in the orchid house, so it is probably some type of orchid. But I don't, honestly, I do not remember the type of flower. This one, no one down there could tell me. Again, the guy that our driver didn't speak enough English. Nobody in the lodge knew what it was called in English. So I got back here and I just Googled red vein flower Ecuador and went to the images and just started scrolling through hundreds of images and finally found one. It's called an Indian mallow.
Indian mallow. There you go. So we don't
Yeah,
have the
mallow.
name of the orchid.
Yeah.
If anybody knows, if anybody out there knows the name of that last
It
image,
was
that's
this
going to be
one. Yeah, put it in the comments
our,
or the chat real quick. Um,
our
yeah.
mystery image of the day.
Yeah, and I really do try to know my subjects, but I apologize. I don't know that one. All right, so let's look at the water.
Oh, wait, there, Matt Spinetta. Matt, come on. I should have known you were going to come through on this. Matt says that's a canna, Canna, likely Tropicana Black. That sounds like a drink that's been sitting in my fridge too long.
It does, right?
So a
Uh,
canna.
Canada.
Interesting.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Matt. So, all right, before we wrap it up, let's go to that first image. And Melissa says, did you see the tiny hearts smaller than the droplets? Now I see it, and
Yeah,
I did
yeah.
not see it before.
I saw some that kind of looked like L's before. Like I can't.
Uh-huh.
There's,
I didn't
in
even.
the middle, but now that you say that, I do see some that are more some highlights that are more shaped like hearts. There's one that kind of looks like a bird down toward the bottom, a little bit off to the right. Um, but yeah, some of
Interesting.
those way over on the right definitely look like hearts. Wow. Now that you say
Definitely.
that, wow, it's a whole nother thing to level to look at in the image. Um,
Totally.
yeah.
Interesting. Well, I'm gonna echo Melissa's sentiment here. She said, this is why these critiques help even the most experienced photographers. Other people see in our images that we may have gotten too used to seeing or present new ideas we didn't think of. And that's very true. I think, it's like I remember an old job I worked at, and they said, who's going to spot more, the experienced person or the person that's been on the job 1 week? And the answer is the person that's been on the job 1 week, because they're more tuned in, and the experienced person you kind of just overlook a lot. And
Yeah,
that paired with, sometimes we fall in love with certain images and we don't know why,
we
and
do.
it can be detrimental to our, to a good image. We fall in love with an image that really isn't a strong image, but because we have this tie to it, it holds us back.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking when you said that. I think we get emotionally attached to the place that we were, or I mean, there's all sorts of things that we bring. Again, we bring things to images that somebody else may not even have that kind of association. Like you might see one of those flowers and think, that was my mom's favorite flower. And so there's this emotional attachment to a subject that makes you enjoy an image differently or more or whatever than somebody else does.
Definitely. Well, Brett, I want to thank you again. This was just super educational. I learned a lot. I want to thank everybody for not just submitting their images, but also for their input. I mean, we can't
Yeah,
do it without you guys really getting involved, and we try to get you guys involved as much as possible in this whole virtual setup. It's not always easy, but I do appreciate you guys being there for us every day, tuning in, sending in your images, getting in your feedback. A huge thank you to the entire Sigma team for sponsoring today's event. Brett, we're gonna have to get you back soon. We'll do this again, man.
absolutely.
Awesome. Well, we are looking forward to it. It's all we got for you today. A huge thank you again to Brett and Sigma and the rest of you guys for all tuning in. It's been another rendition of the Bean Event Space. We will catch y'all next time.